All right. Hello, everybody. We're back with another conversation for the Free Will Project. I'm here with my buddy Justin. Justin, you want to introduce yourself to our viewers?
Hey, my name is Justin Gallant. I am living currently in California. Grew up on the West Coast most of my life, from California to Washington. I think Chet and I have known each other now for at least 10 years, actually, at this point, if I'm thinking right. I was raised a fundamentalist Catholic. Gave that up pretty early on in my life, and went to school for history and philosophy. I majored in Eastern Asian studies specifically. Been interested in politics and philosophy for as long as I could read. I remember when I was a 3-year-old looking at Dr. Seuss books, and that was like my intro to philosophy, right?
Hell yeah.
But I'm happy to be here with you, Chet.
Awesome. Yeah. We've known each other for like quite some time, and I don't recall us ever discussing free will. So this will be kind of an interesting like new conversation for us. But yeah. Uh, do you have any like specific background on this particular subject? Did you ever talk about it in philosophy?
Yeah, obviously, we talked about it in various aspects of philosophy. It's a lot more of a subject that's touched upon in more of a Western philosophical tradition. A lot of the Eastern philosophical traditions tend to have either various forces acting upon you, which I think has a little bit more of impact on the idea of free will than one all-consuming God, for instance. Uh, and a lot of times it will go along with the natural order of things, which I also think goes a lot more with free will rather than an antagonistic approach that humans versus nature or humans versus humans. A lot of times, especially like stuff such as Taoism and Confucianism, is it's about the right way, and the right way is already shown to you through nature. So it's not a dominant force coming down and telling you exactly what to do. It's more of an inclination of looking around you and going, oh well, this is what's already happening, so I guess that's why I'm doing this.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff's kind of more like go with the flow type philosophy,
Yeah.
something like that. Um, and that's come up on in this conversation a few times, kind of the difference between the sort of Western and Eastern outlook. You can't really generalize things totally, but it does seem like there are some like generalities that arise naturally. And so like you were saying that like free will is more of like a Western discussion, that it doesn't seem to be as prevalent in like Eastern philosophy.
Again, yeah, the generalities are very hard to say, because every time I would say something like that, I could point towards another aspect of a religion that was born out of the same area that's like, no, actually, the king's God, and the God's going to tell you what to do. So, you know.
Man, that's
But
unfortunate.
yeah. But I mean, I feel like that's just always whenever you have humans trying to control other humans. Oh, how do I tell them that I want them to do exactly what I want them to do? Well, you know what? I'll come up with a great philosophical idea of it. I am God. How about
Yeah,
that?
yeah, it turns out I'm divine. Who guessed? Like,
I can do no wrong. I mean, but ultimately, yeah, I would say that when you're looking at something like these ideas of manifest destiny, that we have a direction that we're going, and that direction that we're going is based on how we bring ourselves to that point. It's a very Western idea. In Eastern philosophy, a lot of times it's about community, for instance. Your interactions with nature, the natural surroundings that you're with, your interactions with family, your interactions with strangers. Those things are all brought to light in a way of, okay, well, let's walk into this situation, assess it for what it is, and then move towards the appropriate approach. Versus, I'm going to come in and I'm going to make it this way, and that's just how it is, because you know what? manifest destiny.
I think of that as sort
uh,
of like a cowboy attitude, like.
yeah. Where's that
um
go?
oh god, that's horrible. Do you have
Yeah.
any like particular influences with regard to free will, or is it something that you gave much thought to during your academic time?
Yeah, I've come to a lot of conclusions, but they're not necessarily based on any sort of philosophical arguments that I was approached with at that time. A lot of it actually comes through my understanding of epigenetics, for instance. I think that has a lot to do with it. How our genes are expressed based on environmental factors. Um, Obviously, we can start talking about even further things like actual genes. What do I need to survive as a human being? But also things such as anthropology, how different societies have interacted in the past. But one of my biggest influences has also been evolutionary theory. This, whole getting past the survival of the fittest, only the strong survive. What we're actually finding most of the time is that, such as early humanoids, friendliness was a huge factor that caused us to survive. And a lot of times, the extremely violent factors were kind of pushed aside as they didn't last very long. No communities really wanted to rally around them. And I think looking into those notions that are so ingrained, at least in the society that I think you and I live in, that survival of the fittest, you got the bigger gun, you're gonna win, that sort of thing. I got more money, I must have worked harder. A lot of those things are just scientifically proven to be untrue time and time and again. The more studies that come out, the more research that's being done, we just find that ideas that existed in the ether philosophically and concrete results are now finally converging, where we can say, actually, it's not just some utopian vision of the future. It's like, this is actually what naturally our entire species has been evolving towards the entire time we've ever been around.
Right,
Um,
right. It's kind
and
of
I think that that's just a beautiful concept.
yeah, we're kind of learning that that our sort of social myth of human nature is I mean just that it's more of a myth of like early social Darwinist science that doesn't really pan out with the modern empirical results. uh, I Not that long ago I read Rucker Bregman's Humankind. I don't know if you heard about that one. It was
I have not read it yet.
it was really good. It was for the most part it was just like a an exercise in confirmation bias because it was telling me everything I wanted to hear, but also like for good reason, right? Um, like you were saying, it's kind of the convergence of what we're learning on the empirical side of things and what we've been thinking as far as like the philosophical side of things kind of coming together. His argument was basically that people are fundamentally like all right, like we're not fallen evil beings. We're not destined to just compete endlessly and destroy each other, things like that. um, one of his interesting arguments, you mentioned friendliness. One of the interesting things he talked about was the effects of domestication and kind of the sort of way in which we, in self-domesticating ourselves, we probably selected for friendliness. And that's something that's borne out in like different studies on how you can domesticate foxes and things like that, which are notoriously difficult to domesticate,
Yeah.
because they select for the wrong things. But if they select for friendliness, you actually get domesticated foxes.
Hmm.
So that's one of those things. The I can't remember the term he uses. It's something like the puppyification of humans. Like we kind of, in selecting for friendliness, we kind of end up with more sort of cute features. Like we kind of end up a little more adolescent looking over the span of our lives. And he's got a bunch of other claims, but it's definitely a book worth reading. It was really good. Um, so the one of my big motivations for this conversation is to not only talk about like abstract theoretical things, but to understand what this conversation means if applied to society, like what kind of reforms we might be looking at, if indeed there's good reason to be skeptical about free will, and I think there is. Um, I think the implications are quite big, but one avenue for understanding like the depth of the implications is in how it could potentially affect criminal justice. And so what I'm hoping to see is in the discussion of free will, we'll understand like better what it means to like shape people's behavioral outcomes, and we'll understand that like what we're doing now makes no sense, and will actually shape society in such a way that we get better behavioral outcomes. And a lot of that has to do with criminal justice reform and preventative measures, so that it never gets to the state of having to like restrain someone or remove them from society. Like we can have better behavioral outcomes before we even get to some problematic situation like that. At least in a lot of cases, Um, is that something you have any opinions or like instincts on or anything like that?
No, I think the criminal justice system is just fine. I think we're chugging along perfectly. In fact, 25% is not enough of the world's prison population. I say boost it.
Right, right. That's a lot
uh,
of private prison contracts that we're missing out on. We're missing out on 75% of those prisoners.
I mean, if we just kind of went to a full-on corporation mode, we could take over all the prisons throughout the world. Could you imagine that? We'd have all the prisoners. It'd be 100%. It'd be amazing.
America number one.
No, I think that actually it's extremely relevant what you're saying, because a lot of times when we look at criminal justice reform, there's usually two sides of it that don't really communicate in the same language. I think, and this is probably one of the best examples of where those two could converge and understand each other. One side is, well, there's violent aspects of society and we have to take care of it, and by any means necessary, basically, at this point. You have everything from straight up killing to putting them in a solitary holding cell for the rest of their life. You have, and everything in between.
Right. Yeah.
Actually, there's even worse than either one of those that we do. But
Unfortunately.
Yeah. And I think that it doesn't have to be this or that. When we're looking at people, we're not ever trying to say, okay, well, let's just throw them in a cage. That'll take care of the problem, right? I mean, I think that even people who know that getting criminal elements out of society, we're not doing anything better for the rest of the world by then putting them all together in one big cage and going, well, have fun, figure it out. You got to go by these strict set of guidelines, and we're not going to give you much of anything to do with your brain while you're doing it.
Right. Yeah. There's very little effort at rehabilitation in our system. It's mostly a punitive focus.
And when you're looking at something like that and you don't realize that the next step would be, okay, so are you saying that these people never get released? I mean, what if it's a nonviolent misdemeanor crime that they just committed too many of? For instance, the three-strike laws, which a lot of states like California have, and which hopefully actually we're going to be overturning during this election. Which
nice.
But one of the things that I find extremely problematic about that is that we have this idea that they're going to be criminals for the rest of their life. And it's actually very understandable that that's how people feel, because the recidivism rate, the rate of people coming back into prison or recommitting a crime, is extremely high. Mm-hmm. And so why wouldn't we as a society just assume once a criminal, always a criminal? Well, that's how we've set it up. We've never given it a chance to, how do we get these people skills? How do we get them back into society? What if we do give them the skills and then we get them back in society? Well, now they have felonies on their record and they can't get a job.
Hmm.
That's one of the things that is huge here in California. We've had inmates in prisons fighting our fires for years. They get paid pennies on the dollar. And when they get out of prison, they can't actually get those fire jobs because they're felons.
Right.
So, that's something one of our governor, I like to call him the governor. He's Gavin Newsom, our governor.
I hadn't heard that one
Uh,
yet.
yeah, it was a joke. Accidentally, one day I was trying to say Governor Gavin Newsom, and it just kind of. It's kind of like the governator, got to have a nickname for every governor in California. But that's something he's trying to change, which would allow inmates who have served on the firefighting force in the past to be able to get those jobs, which would be amazing. But it's just one of those tiny little steps, and those are the type of steps that we need to look at. And with a whole new outlook on free will, I think that those things would come as no-brainers.
Yeah, I think that's, to me, that's why this conversation is attractive, is because a little bit of movement here has like really big effects across the board. It's really like deep in our assumptions about how the world works, that people basically deserve what they get. We were talking before we started this about the notion of just desserts, like the philosophical concept that if you do something good, it should be rewarded. If you do something bad, it should be punished. And that all stems from you driving yourself with your free will. And we know in a lot of instances through psychological research that especially rewarding things monetarily is not always the best way to get more of that behavior. And punishing things, especially like punishing violent behavior, is a great way to get more violence. So I remember that's one of we both know about James Gilligan. That's one of his lines, is that the biggest driver of violent behavior, the biggest stimulus, is like the punishment that comes from it. It creates a sort of cycle there. So yeah, that's
Exactly.
that's definitely one of my motivations in having this conversation, is kind of creating uh, a different view that sort of undermines the foundation for the punitive measures that we inflict on people, that creates that recidivism rate, that basically screws people's lives up and puts them in these cycles where you can't get out of it, even though like you were saying, you end up with people that have firefighting experience, and for some reason we don't want to utilize that as a society. It's like we've trained these people. Presumably we have no reason to not utilize their skills, and yet because of this notion that like, oh well, they're a bad person or they make bad choices, uh, that suddenly renders them as like useless to our market system. And it's like that doesn't make any sense at all. These are
They were
people.
only useful when we only had to pay them pennies on a dollar.
Oh geez, yeah, that's
When they had to become
painful.
productive, yeah. As soon as they had to become real full-fledged firefighters, I don't know. They're not useful anymore.
Yeah, we've got these other people that'll work for pennies on the dollar. Like
Yeah.
that's it's
Oh, it gets them out of jail for a few days. Yeah, I'm sure they're happy about it.
yeah, it's super problematic. um so anyways, yeah, the I wanted to hang on the concept of just desserts for just a minute, because you had mentioned that that's a somewhat new term to you, or the concept wasn't new, but the terminology may have been new. Is
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead, you go.
Uh, yeah, no, it was a new term to me. Just I'm looking at it thinking just deserts here, and so I'm going, well, is it just basically he just wants to come at me with this totally, oh, here's optimistic, no free will. Just kidding, it's only just desserts or deserts. You're going from one desert to the next. I was like, oh, well, that sounds terrible. But yeah, no, looking it up, it makes it makes a lot more sense that it's basically the simplistic view, in my opinion, from what I got out of it, was that people get rewards based on good behavior that they themselves have acquired or they themselves have pushed, and that people get punished based on things that they have themselves have brought upon themselves. Whereas the reality is usually a lot more complex. In my opinion, it's not just what you've done or who you are, what circumstances you were born into, but also the societal factors that are at play at that time and place. You know, hey, if I went and told on a guy I saw stealing a pack of toilet paper from the store, technically I would be rewarded for that, right? It would be good, praiseworthy uh, action. But the reality is, I probably just deprived this man and their family of toilet paper that they couldn't afford or couldn't get otherwise. And somehow that's not praiseworthy, right?
Right.
Things like that are so gunked up in societal norms, so that regardless of whether we're on our own moral ground or not, we're often praised and belittled for things that we have little or no control over whether we think is right or wrong anyway.
Yeah. I think this is also, we were talking beforehand about the sort of difference between, the broad narratives in left and right politics, and the left tends to be a bit more aware of things like social structure and environmental influences, and the right tends to have this more just world view, where you are the cause of the things that you receive, and kind of more in the line of the just desserts conversation. And it seems to me that if you buy into this notion of just desserts, that people are getting what they deserve in society, um, in reality, what's actually happening is there's a number of feedback loops that get set up where someone's born a bit lucky, and because of that, they have good behavioral outcomes, and then they get rewarded for those behavioral outcomes, which contributes to better behavioral outcomes. Like, eventually you have this sort of inequality in outcomes develop, and it doesn't really have anything to do with the character of someone. Whether it's more about those social influences. It's more about whether you were born into a situation that allowed you to thrive, and hence receive more rewards along the way and do better, or if you were born into a situation that didn't allow that, and you receive the punishment of those behavioral outcomes, and then those punishments stack up, and from there you end up with things like the disastrous recidivism rates we have, things like that. um, so that was a long babble. But what I was wanting to get at was that this conversation has implications for both left-wing and right-wing politics. And I think the most interesting part on the left, on the right, it's basically just like arguing about whether or not something like just desserts makes sense. Because if it doesn't make sense, then they would have to change a lot of their worldview. On the left, it's a little bit more nuanced, where the question here is like, uh, does it totally explain society? I brought up the term earlier, systemic causation. So I feel like on the left, a lot of times we stop just short of what the conclusion should be, that we should be looking at society as a system totally. And I notice a lot of people are on board with that. But then we also want to, I don't know, kind of demonize the villains of our society. We like to have like the bad guy to rally against and stuff like that, which is, understandable and fun. But
Enemies up against the wall,
yeah, yeah, some of that gets a little scary.
the guillotine. Yeah.
And so I think what's in this conversation for us on the left is a better understanding of how to affect society, of how to affect the behavior of those that we're not happy with. Um, uh, we're able to better understand, the these sort of supervillains of the week, like Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates or whoever it is that pops up. We'll have a new one in a year, or maybe not. Maybe Jeff Bezos is like left economic orbit, and he's just like maybe he's received some sort of godhood status or something already.
He's already creating his own planet.
Right. But I think there's a lot in this for us that I really want, on the left particularly, I really want us to struggle with this and to dig in and to understand when we ourselves are acting not as not being proactive, but instead being like reactive to that overall system. And so my hope is that we would use our knowledge of how society works, of what the social and biological influences are on behavior, and we would apply that to the political outcomes we want to see, which is a tall order. And I don't know exactly how to do that, but I think having this conversation is like maybe a first step in going that direction, and being consistent, and actually, applying, modern science to get what we want out of the political system we have available, and hopefully achieve like a more ideal one in the future. I don't know.
I think that's a great point. I see a huge cognitive dissonance that happens here, especially on the left, like you were talking about, is that a lot of the time we do talk about systemic problems. We understand that there's systemic racism. We understand systemic poverty and the classes that we've all been put into. We understand that the rich tend to just get richer, and we understand the poor tend to stay either where they're at or get more poor. We understand all of these things are systemic, but I don't think that what is brought to the conversation enough is exactly what you're saying, is that there's actual science behind these things. And in order for it to be consistent, we can't just say systemic racism is bad, so let's change that, and then all of a sudden it's all good. When we're talking about it, it's systemic racism isn't just one thing by itself anyway. It's caught up in this whole cobweb of other things that are going on, which is what I think you're trying to say, or you're getting to, is that how do we put these same ideas of skepticism of free will into the same overarching ideas in our political structures, not just on individual grounds, but as a whole.
Yeah.
As a whole structure almost.
Yeah, I think a lot of the narratives I see on the left will dip into that notion of just desserts, whenever we're like focused on like, one of the, like I mentioned, like one of the supervillains or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think we'd be much more consistent to abandon just desserts. And, I mentioned that TED Talk with Greg Caruso, and he talked about the public health quarantine model, which is kind of what I would consider to be a more objective approach to shaping behavior for optimal outcomes, where we don't have to feel hate or the need for vengeance or these sorts of things towards problematic people, but instead we can approach their behavior more objectively and try to more effectively shape it, so that for the benefit of everyone's well-being, including that person who is behaving in some problematic manner, because that's, when you think about it, that's not good for them either. Like, it's not good for your health to be racist or something like that. Like, it doesn't really bring you meaningful joy. Like, a lot of people veer towards those narratives because they're looking for meaning in life of some sort, but I wouldn't say it delivers. Like, I think, coming up with a better narrative to sort of supplant those negative ideas, I don't know, maybe more effective in the long run than I don't know, throwing a punch or something like that. Although, hey, I'm not going to shame anyone for throwing a punch.
Yeah. I mean, there's a time and a place for things that we need to do, and we are still very reactive in our emotions, so things will happen regardless of whether we're the most logical human being in the entire world. We're trying to put everything in line. I don't think that balance is perfect for anyone,
Right.
but I think that's a perfect example here too. Of what you're saying is that it's harmful. A lot of the things that we hold on to ourselves, this hate, this idea that, oh, killing is somehow going to make things better, or hating someone or having vengeance in your heart. Most of the times when you look at studies with people who get revenge, for instance, they're not actually doing better afterwards. They're not happier or anything. They did something that appeased their emotion at the moment, for sure. And I'm
Hmm.
sure it felt good maybe at the moment. There's a lot of things we do at the moment that feel great, and then afterwards we're like, yeah, I shouldn't have done that, or like, I don't feel good about it. And really, that's what we're going on about, is this idea that punishment is somehow going to make us better human beings, or somehow fulfill our desires, or fulfill needs within us or as a society. And that's not going to help us do anything other than just continue the cycle, like you said, a feedback loop that just keeps going, keeps
Right.
going. It's like, oh, well, I hate you, you did this, I'm going to kill you. And the next person says, well, actually, when you were killing that person, that was wrong, so now I'm going to kill you. Like, ultimately, what I think is the best route is what you're saying, is it will be less harmful for those people to look at it like a public health question. um, I want healthcare for all, for everybody. Do you think
Right.
that that means that I'm going to take away healthcare from someone else? No. It means I want better healthcare for every single person.
Yeah.
And what I want actually only helps everyone else out and doesn't take away from anyone. I think that's the only way we're ever going to see something move forward. And you don't have to take away from people in order to give to others. That's just not the way that it has to be. We always think of it as this sort of, there's 100, right? And if I get 50, well, then what do we do about the other 50? No,
Right.
it's actually a much wider thing. Maybe one of that 100 could be the equal to another whole 100. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. It's a sort
We
of
don't have to think that way.
yeah, it's the sort of the abundance versus scarcity mentality. Like, are we either like locked in like a competitive zero sum game, or or on the other hand, like, is it possible that everyone's needs could be fulfilled and we could each play a role in fulfilling each other's needs? And to me, like and there's a lot of interesting psychology on abundance versus scarcity mindsets. And to me, like, it's a really powerful tool to be able to recognize the difference between those, and to try to at least attempt to lean into the more abundance perspective, and to just kind of make that a base assumption that, like, there's probably some way for everyone to win in this scenario. Like, my win doesn't have to mean your loss. So I don't know. The other thing I see that's in this conversation for the left, I got from Yuval Harari, who's a very interesting Israeli historian. He's done a lot of interesting writing, and he's mentioned this in both Homo Deus and also in his book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, that the concept of free will, which he will state pretty plainly is a myth. Um, the concept of free will is actually like really fundamental to the notion of liberalism, to the notion that we are like these free actors in the marketplace of both like goods and services and also ideas and such. And his contention is that with the rise of biotech, it's going to be more and more obvious to us that, or at least to some of us, that this is a myth. And the danger in that, in not recognizing that, is that we are more exploitable, which you could already see this with like, Facebook. Like, everyone I know is on Facebook, and we know that they're messing with us. They're messing with our emotions. We get manipulated politically and whatnot. and a lot of that, traces back to this sort of notion that we're all free, rational, independent actors in control of our own destinies and whatnot. And it just, scientifically speaking, it just ain't so. We're very subject to the effects of the environment. So what I think is in it for us on the left is that we can basically critique markets. We can critique the sort of liberal notion of the self, the rational actor, all of these different fundamental concepts to the liberal worldview. We can critique these at a level so deep and also empirically grounded that it really makes it difficult to both respect science and also persist in that direction. So it would cause a little bit of cognitive dissonance on the other side, and I think it would really like shake up that worldview and create space for more important, more meaningful conversations about like what our true human potential is, what our true human nature is, things like that. So that's another motivation I have here, is to create like a deep critique of our current social order and what our potentials are, and how to affect society to get to those potentials.
There's, when I'm listening to you, there's a few things that I specifically first popped in my head, which was anybody in one of the major world religions right now would have a problem with this entire thing. Obviously that would be, in my opinion, one of the biggest setbacks, is that it throws into this whole calamity notion that what your entire worldview is based on is probably not correct. And then I started thinking, well, yeah, but everyone who's a part of these major world religions have already faced those calamities. I mean, just look at the world around you. It has nothing to do with basically anything that is written in any of those books or what their supposed religious leaders taught them anyway.
Or there's kind of a parallel. There's kind of a parallel with evolutionary theory as well. Like that challenges a lot of people's religious worldview.
That's, I think, being sensitive to it and talking in more precise language without having to directly confront something like an overarching God or, heaven or hell, something like that, without having to approach those things specifically, putting them more in like human terms, what's going on around us, I think would go a long way at maybe circumventing those ideas and allowing them to stew in their brain before it ever becomes a direct confrontation. Because as soon as you bring up someone's religion, a lot of times that's just that the conversation is not going to go anywhere,
Right.
It's just going to end right there. Like, oh, well, actually everything you believe is probably fucking wrong. Nobody's going to want to sit there and listen to that,
Yeah, tell me more.
Yeah, really interesting. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, no, and that's something personally I'm trying to kind of discover. That's part of this conversation as well, is kind of discover how to talk about it more effectively, because I've spent a lot of time kind of developing my own ideas with it, but when they come out of my mouth, a whole other thing happens. And so that's,
we have internal bias. Oh, I did not know that.
So I am very curious about different people's strategies for communicating, on this subject, because it is deep, and for the same reasons that I think it'll be effective to discuss it, it's also very difficult to discuss it. And it does challenge people on a very fundamental level. A lot of times when you bring up free will skepticism, people are just like referencing their subjective like first person experience, and they're like, what are you talking about? Like, I can feel it right now in the moment. And yeah,
I'm just gonna walk away. Tell me that wasn't free will.
Yeah. Damn, that's the trump card, man.
Yeah.
I can't beat that. So yeah, it is definitely important to learn how to discuss this stuff strategically, and I'm still in that process myself. And uh, it's also difficult to discuss it consistently, because I think a lot of this stuff is, uh, like I said, very fundamental. It's buried deep in our culture. It's buried deep in our language. Um, it's so deep that even inspiring skepticism on the subject very difficult. Uh, so yeah, I don't. Do you have any thoughts about maybe like approaching difficult subjects like this with more tact, like, or do you have any sort of tactics that you employ whenever you discuss blah, 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 relevant subjects like
Uh,
this?
well, I mean, I think that trying to enter it wherever the person is at the moment is the best way of doing it. For instance, the firefighting example that I gave up before earlier, without diving too deep into this subject, you can talk about that, and on a fundamental level, people get that.
Yeah.
They understand it, and I think enough fundamental levels tacked together into a nice little row, eventually you have something to work with. It's not necessarily like, well, look at all these things. Now, free will, it's not real. I mean, but like, by doing this, you could start saying something like, okay, poverty. Let's say somebody born in an extremely impoverished nation with very little resources, has real no upward mobility, let's say can't even really move to another country or something to get a better life. Most people understand it's not because they're not working hard. It's not because they're lazy or they're stupid.
Right.
It's because they have no opportunity whatsoever to succeed anyway.
Yeah.
And so when you start with these little things here and there and you give little tiny examples, people start to go, oh, okay, there is a veneer in there, like I can't tell you how many times I brought up in jobs when I finally get comfortable enough to start talking about these types of things in jobs. I'll say, a billionaire shouldn't exist. I think it's ridiculous, and people, oh, they worked so hard. And if they did it ethically, and I go, okay, tell me an ethical billionaire. Tell me what they've done that they've ethically become a billionaire. Some people will be like, oh, well, they had this great invention. Cool. So they came up with an invention. I think the invention's great. It's a wonderful invention. Don't get me wrong. How many people did they exploit to get there?
Right.
How did they get the resources behind to create that invention? Did they maybe work with someone else and then take the patent from them afterwards? Different things like that. How many inventions were they working off of previously from other people and then they got no recognition?
Right.
There's just an absurd amount of things that are going on to possibly think that everyone deserves exactly what they're getting right now. And just even on the most basic level, a child dying of a disease that could be prevented.
Right.
Most people aren't going to go, well, that kid deserved it. Unless you do have the religious worldview, which is God wanted them back, but or it was their time or something like that.
Right. And even a lot of those folk have like a hard time really swallowing that thing. They might say
you're still gonna be sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's your child, you're not going to be like, wow, I'm really happy that God got him back. You're going to be sad. You're going to feel something in you that says this is just not right.
Right.
And
yeah, the world is unjust, like.
Yeah, exactly. And if you can just find one or two examples, you already poked enough holes in an entire worldview that we've shaped like our entire society around, that if you can poke two holes in like 2 seconds, think of how many you could continually poke. And I'm not ever expecting to talk to people and assuming them to convince them right then and there. But poke two holes, give some ideas of who to check out, people that speak a little bit more eloquently than myself, for instance.
Right.
Maybe think about this a little bit more than I do. Don't have to sit around and worry where the next paycheck is going to come from,
Right.
Which actually can lead on to the next subject here, but give some ideas, some directions, because people don't, if they didn't like what I was already talking about, they're not getting investigated anyway. But if I've given them enough and I wasn't too combative about it, usually it gives them some interest, like, oh, I might not agree with him, but I'm gonna look it up because maybe he just didn't explain it very well. And I've had
Right.
people do that. They go, oh, okay, cool, wow, you know what? This person did it in 10 minutes, what I could have had 5 hour long conversation with him about, and I would have never got the amount of information out of it, you know?
Right.
And that may come along with the idea of authority and of course, but you know, it's not something I do on a regular basis, go around lecturing to people about different topics, especially free will skepticism.
Man,
So
I'm
um,
downtown every weekend with the sandwich board and the megaphone and like free will's not real. Like I
no,
don't
you're the
know.
guy, you're Ben Shapiro with the sign, right?
Oh man.
I'm a
um
free will skeptic, change my
yeah,
mind.
yeah, debate me, bro. Um
uh,
yeah, no,
you
and I
have no
mean
free will, I'll change my mind.
and I mean you bring up a lot of instances there where like you know, on the surface you're pointing at like different things in society, but really like at the core you're talking about different instances of just desserts, you know, whether someone deserves uh, the total credit for like inventing something when, you know, we're not really authoring our thoughts, like we're not like the ultimate arbiters of like what's going on inside our head. We don't even know what's going on in there most of the time. We're conscious of, you know, a percent or two of what's actually happening. And so like how is it that we come to take credit for like the product of that process when, you know, it all has to do with you know, biological predisposition, early childhood influences, like, you know, the social dynamics, like, and it goes on and on and on. And, you know, you like in your head pulling the levers, really, that's not really how like inventions happen. So like, how is it that we credit people for a lifetime with these, you know, with like, this is the person that invented, you know, X good, and therefore they deserve $1 billion. Meanwhile, you know, David Graeber has pointed out many times that a lot of times the rewards in society are like inverse, that like the people that are doing the most vital work are the ones getting like the least reward, you know, educators, and, you know, janitors, people that maintain everything, you know, creating new stuff is a very small amount of the work that actually happens. Most people are maintaining what exists, and those people aren't, you know, pulling in the 6 7 8 figure incomes, so, you know, and beyond because yeah, billionaires. um so yeah, I think I think there's a lot of ways that you pointed out there of oh, what do we get? Hell yeah, hell yeah. uh David Graeber's a hero to this channel. um Uh, but yeah, yeah, you know, you pointed out in a lot of subtle ways, like this larger pattern in society where we think people deserve, uh, you know, the fruits of their actions, and in reality, those fruits are, you know, socially produced. Like we're all involved in invention. You know, the people that maintain the infrastructure, you know, make it possible for invention to happen. The people that, you know, do the dirty work, just as much a part of it as anyone else. So like it undermines this notion that we should have like such big inequalities in society, if any at all. Uh, but yeah, that kind of leads into the next subject that I had written down was something we've been interacting about for the decade that we've known each other, is automation, and the effects that automation will have on the economy, that it is having on the economy. And a lot of, I think it's kind of a natural process that's leading us to question uh, this notion that people have to earn their keep, because now we have these like uh, super productive systems, and the fruits of those systems are going upward, and then we have people who are doing the work that are not receiving the benefits of it, And automation's kind of highlighting this contradiction that like people aren't getting the just desserts that we were all promised. And so it seems to be emphasizing this sort of contradiction in society, this sort of myth that we're all told that you know, you do get what you deserve, that it is a just world. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts about how like automation and the changing economy might relate to the rest of the conversation we've been having.
Yeah, well, let me start off with just right before we got into this topic. It was kind of it's a great transitionary part of it. Is what you were saying is the rewards are generally inversed, and I think we can all see that from COVID, especially during this lockdown. I mean, we just went into the red tier in California. We have multiple tier systems of how dangerous it is. And while red sounds like the worst, it's actually purple that's the worst for us. So we're actually one step below it. So few businesses started opening up and everything. And I mean, we were the first county to go down in March. So just now a few businesses are opening up. Does that mean everybody was indoors? Does that mean nobody was working? No, there were plenty of people on the front lines having to do work, and most of them being paid basically nothing.
Right.
You know, and in California we have a much higher minimum wage because the state's been progressively getting it much higher. It's not 7.25. You know, in my area it's 13 this year, and even that is not enough to live on in California. I mean,
Oh
at
yeah,
least
the
not
cost of
in the
living.
major cities.
Yeah.
And I think that that's just one of those amazing points of view as we go, well, you know, most of these admin jobs, most of these big high finance, high end CEO jobs, most of those people could sit at home. They didn't really have to do anything. You know, we still needed groceries. We still needed food.
Right.
We still needed trash being picked up. We still needed frontline healthcare workers. You know, I mean, we still needed educators in some sort of a sense. And
Right.
actually what we needed educators to relearn how they do their entire teaching model in like a few months. It's something that some of these people at age 70 have never had to rethink since the moment they got their teaching license. So I think that this is forcing us to realize that our society is not what we were always promised. The just desserts are not there. You know, everything from the stock market becoming completely uncoupled from the economy, just desserts. Yes, who owns most of the stock market? Well, not us. I can
Right.
tell you that.
Right.
I think I got like $1,000 in my Robinhood account.
Yeah.
And
Whoa.
that's
Slow down.
big, man. I mean, I don't know too many people my age that even have that.
You bougie fuck. No.
I, I know. Actually, I just see it go down every day too.
Oh
I'm
shit.
like, well, you know,
What are
I
you
mean, I
What are you
didn't know
gonna
what I
do?
was doing. I was just like, throw money at Disney? I don't know. Put it in the weed stock market? Sure.
That's a booming business
Uh,
out there.
Actually, it's funny. The weed stock market is another one of those really funny ones where the just desserts are perfectly aligned there. You've got people that were never affected by the drug war, ever.
Hmm.
You know, really wealthy, high-end financiers, basically accountants and such, people from Silicon Valley, all coming in, and they're going throughout the entire U.S. and Canada, and setting up these businesses, and then all conglomerating together under these other big names. So you've got like a handful of people now owning most of the stores, and in certain states like California, you can have them what's called vertically integrated. So you could be the person who grows it, who processes it, let's say to candies or oil or something like that, or even just trims it, and then packages it. And then you can also have the retail store where you sell it. So you can have all of those functions, whereas something in like Washington, for instance, if you have a retail location, you can't have a growing location. You can't have a processing location. They're all separate licenses. California, you got people that's like 5 people that own all the farms, all the recreational spots, all the processing plants, and even worse, they're white labeling their weed to sell to smaller companies that can't grow it all. And basically they're just designing labels, throwing it on their package and saying, here's my weed. And it's like, well, yeah, but it's the same stuff is right next to it, just with a different label. You know?
Right.
And you think that the people that were selling weed when it was illegal, people that got caught for a dime bag, you think those people are benefiting from this? No, not really.
Right.
They're
Right.
not making
Yeah.
much money.
The vulnerable people are still left vulnerable, even though they're the ones that basically, you know, pave the way. It's,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, I remember why I brought that up is so the stock market is for weed has actually been going way down, even though sales during COVID has been like sky high.
Oh, I imagine.
Yeah, investors want their money back already. They just thought it was going to be a get rich quick scheme. It's like it's a business just like any other business. You can't just get $1 million in like half a day. Okay, I'm sorry, it just doesn't work that
Wow.
way.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of those differences in the models. So that's an interesting highlight from our current situation. And yeah, how do you look at that and say like, yeah, everyone's getting what they deserve, right? Like you can't, like that's absurd. Um,
If you only would have held out for another 20 years, you could have sold that weed legally. Don't mind the fact that you were probably one of the type people that actually got it legalized in the first place, but you know, whatever.
right, right. Well, we needed more firefighters.
Yeah. You're
uh,
cheaper if you're in jail, though. So.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
Jesus. Um,
this was getting back to what did you end up? I'm sorry, I went on my tangent then.
oh no, you're good. I was kind of leading us into to automation and kind
Automation,
of
yes.
how automation's kind of highlighting the mythical status of just desserts. So you kind of can't justify, like you were mentioning, you know, the so-called essential workers. They weren't being paid very essentially, right? Like they're they're taking huge risks with their health to keep you know, privileged people safe during this thing. They're putting their own, you know, health on the line. And like you said, like what are they making? Maybe $13 in some instances an hour, which is you know, adjusted for cost of living is nothing. Like it's
No, yeah. Most of those people making 13 bucks an hour have 3 or 4 other jobs, you know,
right.
and that's in California. And I can only even imagine what 725, or actually in some states, I know that I'm not sure if Iowa is one of them, but you know, servers, for instance, can be paid below the minimum wage, and then their tips are supposed to make it up to the minimum wage or
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine how people could live like that. Like I
Yeah.
had a girlfriend at one point in North Carolina. She was making like $3.18 an hour or something like that. And you know, on a slow day, she got no tips. Well, that's what she made per hour.
Yeah, and they're supposed to, the employer's supposed to make up the difference if they're not getting tipped. But
Supposed to.
yeah, all the conversations I've ever had, people are like, yeah, that doesn't happen. But if you ask for that, you get let go. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things where it's like, I mean, the restaurant business in general is just a really really tight margin of profit. Like it's, if you're, you know, at the bottom of that order, it's really hard to get by. Like I've got friends that have, I've never myself been in the restaurant industry, but I've heard enough stories to know that it's tough. It's tough for the people trying to get by on that. Um,
You know, I've never worked in the food industry myself. I've had tons of retail jobs, customer service jobs, and such,
right.
but I never went into the food industry, and it wasn't for the lack of trying. Some of my first jobs I tried to get, I never got calls back from McDonald's or Taco Bell. My first job ended up being TJ Maxx. They called me back right away. It was great.
Hey, they were like, let's get this good looking guy behind the counter. He's gonna sell some
Yeah,
shit.
he's young. We could pay him $7.25, no problem. I
Oh
remember
man.
actually, I got a promotion to head cashier, and I was still only 17. I graduated high school a little early, and they promoted me to head cashier. I, you know, negotiated this wage, but here I am, 17, don't understand labor laws very well. I negotiated it in December. On January, the minimum wage in the state increased to the wage that I negotiated. So I ended up getting nothing extra at all.
Smooth.
It was like a 1 week of an extra like $1 an hour or something like that. It's so dumb.
Yeah.
But automation, I think, is a great point here. Is when does that disrupt so much that we have to rethink things here? And ultimately, we're going to have to rethink the entire just desserts idea with automation, because when we're looking at scenarios like this pandemic, automation would be an amazing thing to have. Things like quote unquote essential workers who are putting their life on the line just by selling you groceries at the grocery store. We really don't need that. I mean, we could easily have automated checkout systems, you know, and this is just a temporary transitionary period. I'm talking, we still have a monetary system and everything. We could have automated checkout systems. We could have automated delivery systems. I mean, all of those things would happen. Farm workers. I'm not a meat eater myself, but you know, that was a huge problem with the meat processing plants. Most of that could be automated. I mean,
that was a big deal here in Iowa. Was a lot of vulnerable communities were putting their lives on the line just to show up at work during this crisis, and a lot of them were being lied to about the dangers, just so that they would keep showing up, because if they knew the truth about the situation, they may not show up. So it was really bad.
Well, I mean, and look at the nature of the work. It's almost impossible to do it in a completely safer manner than what they were already doing. I mean, you're already dealing with raw meat. Let's start there. You know, I mean, raw meat in pretty unclean facilities where you're working really close with other people, and there's blood and knives and shit everywhere. What else do you think is going to happen?
And the speed of production is connected to profit. So you can imagine they're not going, you know, slow and careful. They're moving. So yeah, super dangerous. And you know, like I mentioned, like they're able to draw in people who are in vulnerable positions to do that work. And so, you know, I know that even if I wanted to do that work, I just wouldn't last, because I'm just too much of a weenie, right? Like I'd never make it. But yeah, there's people showing up all through this crisis, you know, trying to do their job, trying to do it as best they can. And yeah, those are the people kind of the rest of us are, you know, standing on, so that we can have our services and goods. And it's, you know, if they were making $1 million an hour, maybe you could justify that, but they're not. They're making hardly anything, right? So it's frustrating. And I think
even at that, $1 million an hour, you do that 1 hour and you quit and you're good.
Everyone would just take their turn.
Yeah, I could just ride out the rest of the year, no problem. Man, I got a couple of years on that million, no problem.
Right? Yeah.
But I think automation there, you know, it would be, in this situation, would be extremely beneficial. And that's not even talking about what it would do for, you know, the entire, well, I would say probably the entire system that we live under, but specifically the idea that we need to put people in harm's way just to keep this thing going.
Yeah.
Just so some people can stay home and not get sick, you know, so some people can do this and be happy. Some people can live in their mansions and do whatever they need to do, you know, like, that's not really what we should be doing. You know, automation could literally lift everybody up. And I think that most people even know it on a fundamental level when they're like, okay, don't work at McDonald's. Oh, that should be a stepping stone sort of job. Like, oh, uneducated people work at McDonald's and it's an easy job. First of all, I know those people work their ass off. First of all, the pace at which they have to do things is outstanding. And, you know, it's just like the Ford lines too. Everything's been down to the wire, exactly how you do it, when you do it, and the way you do it.
Mm-hmm.
But if we all look down on jobs like that, why would we want to promote them still?
Right.
You're basically saying, well, you're good enough not to do it, but these people, they're not good enough. They have to do it. You know, somebody's got to do the job. Fuck it. Make those people do it.
And then if you're that person doing the job, you have to deal with the asshole that thinks you don't deserve to live. Like, what the hell? Like,
I'm gonna yell in your face because you didn't give me a McFlurry.
It's like, sir, this is a Wendy's. Like, um,
uh,
so yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head talking about the potential of automation, you know, to really create quality of life for everyone. Instead, like we're in this current situation where like automation seems to be utilized for like designing an app to have a bunch of, you know, desperate people do like little gig work so that your app makes you like a shit ton of money and you get to be one of those like few billionaires at the top of the economy. But
those aren't employees, by the way.
yeah,
They're just
yeah,
using your app.
yeah, you're like a contractor or whatever. Yeah, no, instead, we could be, you know, using, you know, again, our knowledge of like system causation to take a systems approach to, you know, all of our needs in society. We could be designing the automated processes that fulfill those needs. And whenever something like COVID comes along, uh, we would be unaffected. Like we could take the appropriate steps to protect everyone's health. And at the same time, like why should the economy suffer because a virus comes along? Like that's how weak our current system is that like all it takes is a virus and everything's like fucked for like a year. It's wild.
It took what? How many months for people to start saying, you know, as long as only a few people, the older people die, we need to get this country back on track. Like, it didn't take very long for us to totally justify killing people in order
Yeah,
to appease the economy.
yeah.
You know,
Just
and that seems
sacrifice
so
people to the,
backwards.
yeah.
I mean, shouldn't the economy, like, we've created this thing? It's literally just something we've created. It's not like it exists without us. You know, we created it, and yet somehow it doesn't work for us. We have to work for it. You know, it's,
Right.
uh,
We
it's
literally
like
like
Frankenstein's monster. You know,
we're
we have to work
literally
for it.
we're literally engaging in human sacrifice here to keep to praise the economy, to praise Wall Street. You know, it's very
Look at the
disturbing.
number. The line has gone up.
So yeah, the discussion of automation, the reason I brought it up is because I wanted to get into this notion that, you know, we've been hooked on for a long time, the idea of post scarcity, that there's a way of arranging our economic life to where we're not all competing and combating each other for, you know, just our basic existence, that we can all enjoy economic autonomy, that we can all have our needs fulfilled. It doesn't have to be the zero sum game that we're stuck in at the moment, where, you know, some people have to be sacrificed to keep the economy going, which is just wild. um, so we have this potential to do this now. I believe. I think we're both kind of on the same page with that. That this is something that we could do, that we're just not doing. It's not like we need some Star Trek future utopia to happen. This is, you know, we could apply like our current levels of technology to manifest an economy of abundance. And I think one of the reasons we're not doing that is because we're hooked on so many of these market tropes. You know, these ideas that you do need to justify your existence with labor, which you know, I don't know, hundreds of years ago, maybe that made sense. I'm not convinced that it did, but you know, that's when those justifications came about. But now, given our level of technology, it's like it's totally unjustifiable that anyone should suffer just to make the magic Wall Street number go up. You know, it like
And then
we're
somehow that's going to make us suffer less by doing that. You know, like,
right,
we're going to mitigate suffering by doing some suffering now.
which is
uh,
which is a very market thing to think. Like it's like, you know,
Suffer a little bit now for better future.
it's like I'd like to
Uh,
just stop suffering, please. Like, or at least
we
reduce
could
it
all just kind of
drastically.
do it together, but
Yeah,
no, no.
yeah,
You know, and I think that Daniel Schmachtenberger, we talked about, brought up a really good point, which was with automation is, you know, we don't necessarily have to think of our job or what we do for employment as our worth. But hey, if you find joy in doing it, it doesn't mean that even if it is automated or it can be automated, that you have to just go, oh, well, it's automated, I can't do it. He talked about, for instance, farming. You could probably have, an at-home farming robot, or let's say vertical farms. They're all pretty much automated. But hey, let's say you like having your little garden in your backyard. Nobody's going to stop you from doing your own little gardening in your backyard.
Right.
Oh, you like cleaning your toilet? Go ahead, clean your toilet. That's fine. But I'd say most of the time people don't want to do those things. And I would get so much more joy, I know, out of my life than perpetually not even doing the things I don't want to do, but thinking about having to do the things I don't want to do. Because that is generally what puts me in a standstill, is I think too much about, God, I got to do this thing. And yeah, maybe it won't take very long, but I'm so uninterested and so unmotivated to do it that now that unmotivation is stressing me out. And now it's causing me, even though I'm not doing the actual thing, it's causing me problems here right now.
We're kind of the only species that does this to themselves. Like we live so much of our lives in our head like that, and but I mean, it's a fact that we should deal with, and we should set up an environment that doesn't cause us to suffer needlessly. To the effects of stress, especially like continuous stress over a long period of time, is well documented. Is horrible for us. A little bit of stress in the moment, like maybe that helps you do something kind of cool in the moment, but yeah, the long-term effects are terrible. And that is what our economy is today. It is just a big system of stress that everyone is stuck inside of. And so yeah, if we can engineer our way out of that, like I think that's the path. And I think some of that is related to this conversation, in that we really need to understand how human behavior works in order to create an economy that totally fulfills our needs, that um, results in the optimal behavioral outcomes, that prevents people from needing to be removed from society and restrained for their benefit and for the social benefit. Like that should be an extremely rare instance. If you look at the wild rate that we lock people up in the US at, we're 5% of the world's population, locking up a quarter of the prisoners. There's no reason for that. Like, we just like locking people up. Most of those people are not a threat to society and should be out free, living their best life. And there are going to be like a few people that need to be restrained. But I don't think that has to be any kind of punitive effort. I think we can do that. We can justify that with their personal well-being in mind, with social well-being in mind. We can really think about the system as a whole. And we don't just have to be beating up on vulnerable people all the time, which is what our current social order does. So it's very frustrating.
Well, I'm going to share a little personal story here, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
My father actually ended up being convicted of child molestation and sent to prison many years ago. I was 18, so it's 14 years ago now. And when he went to prison, I just remember there were so many weird things that went on. First of all, the family ended up kind of slowly moving away from him, and eventually it culminated in a divorce and all of this stuff, that the family stopped talking to him entirely. All of these things that were set upon him all of a sudden, even though it was a charge from when I was like 6, so 12 years prior to that, all of a sudden his entire relationships changed. People. Nobody was his friend anymore. All of his family stopped talking to him. He went to prison. He had to fake what he was in prison for so he didn't get killed, basically, and when he got out, I was the only person really willing to talk to him anymore. picked him up from prison, brought him out, and he continued to kind of have this little bit of a lie life where he couldn't explain what actually had happened or anything like that. He's passed away now. I have no problem talking about it, but this comes back to that conversation here, is that he was most assuredly molested when he was in the Catholic Church when he was younger. He's also in Boy Scouts, and there was a lot of really weird things that happened around that time that the family never really talked about. And anytime he would bring that up with him, it was an immediate stop to that conversation, you know? And I think that everyone recognized that around him, is that he probably was damaged as a child and then went on to damage other children. And everyone knew it wasn't necessarily his fault, but we still have that whole tug and pull here, which is everything that happened to him was terrible. And that's terrible that we allowed that to happen to a human being. And then that human being went and propagated onto another human being, thus creating the cycle that's going to continue. And yet, at the same time, don't want to talk to him, don't give him rehab, try to do everything in your power to make sure that he can't succeed in life. When he gets out, they forced him out of certain counties. He wasn't allowed to live in certain counties, so he never went to a county where he had ever lived, so he had no job prospects. He had, you know what I mean? It was just boundless amount of things over and over and over. And, you know, he passed away, and I happened to be there when he was sick, and it was like on a Father's Day. It was a crazy day. But he went into a medically induced coma. And yet the entire family came over, came to see him, came to give me comfort, came to talk to him. Obviously, he couldn't talk. He was medically induced coma. And there was so much regret going around between everyone. Like, oh, I wish I would have said something. Oh, I wish I would have. I was like, he had years and years and years, and you all knew that I was very fine with him. And I understood that, you know, I had to keep them separate. Here's my dad, here's my family. I didn't want to hurt either one of them.
Right.
But as soon as he was dead, then everyone regretted it, because they all knew, well, we should probably continue to have a relationship with him. I have a child with him, or I have, you know, or that's my dad, or something like that. And I think that if we put those regrets into practice right away, we'll realize that changing our perspective now will have a much better outcome for everybody than it will be after the fact. Because, yeah, you may learn after the fact. Great. Glad life taught you a lesson. But it doesn't change the current situation.
Right.
And it might not be able to change it soon enough for somebody who can change.
Right.
And I would have really liked to see something like that have happened. You know, I feel sorry for my sister every day that she never got to say anything to him, never talked to him afterwards. And I remember crying to the doctor, asking if he could just wake him up so she could say something to him.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, that's not how this works. You know, this guy literally has kidney, liver failure, bleeding from his neck. He's in a coma. I mean, what are you gonna just like shake him? No. And I see that as society at large, we reminisce on major problems that we've just let bypass us because we don't put those things in perspective. We're going to look back on times like now. We're going to look back on times like slavery and such, and just go, fuck, what were we thinking?
Right.
Well, you know what? Those people at the time were thinking exactly what they were thinking, which was, well, they deserve it. Mm-hmm. They're less than. Mm-hmm. And by the way, we need them for our economy.
Right.
So, I mean, applying that to the situation now is not the exact same thing. Right now, I wouldn't say that we have, you know, exact slaves here in the U.S. There's obviously arguments for and against that, but I mean, it's not the exact same situation as it was then.
Sure.
But we can apply the same logic to scenarios. What's justified now is not necessarily justified in the future.
Yeah, it's almost certainly not.
And
you know?
we can't always say, oh, well, it was okay then because of these amount of circumstances. Yeah, but could you have changed those circumstances? Well, yeah, we could have. Then it's not justified. if you can change those circumstances, it's not justified.
Thank you
That
for
was a whole nother rant. Sorry
yeah,
there.
no, thank you for telling that story. It sounds like a difficult story to tell. Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, when you think about that, it's a tough subject for people to encounter, productively. It brings up a lot of deep emotions, and when we're looking at something like that, I really hope we can get to the place where we're not worried about punishing that person or them getting what they deserve, but rather we're looking at it again from like a public health perspective. Um, what can we do to uh, make sure this doesn't continue? Like, make sure the cycle doesn't continue. What can we do to resolve the situation rather than possibly fueling it and creating more suffering? And so, yeah, it's difficult, but I think especially on uh, the most deep emotional subjects, I think we really have to dig in and say what is the proactive, like productive move that we can make here for public health. And so I don't know. Thank you for bringing that example up because that's tough stuff.
Well, and I specifically bring that example up to kind of wrap us back into a topic you brought up earlier, which is that the left tends to understand systemic problems a little bit more than I'd say the right does. But we still, I'm sure you encounter it all the time, especially in more hardcore leftist circles. A lot of times the rhetoric is the exact same. You all of a sudden start talking about a child molester, now it's like, oh, cut off his dick and shoot him in the fucking face,
Right.
I hear that shit all the time. Like, oh, every child molester needs to be killed. Every rapist needs to be killed. It's like,
Yeah.
Look, they're horrific actions. I'm not trying to justify them in any sort of way.
Right.
But, let's look at it in the scientific purpose. Chemical castration, for instance, that doesn't stop the motivation or the thing that's going on in people's brains that tend to want to make them violate someone else's space like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not usually just purely sexual. A lot of times there's so much more wrapped up in that. So if we're looking at it in a scientific way, we can't just go, oh, solve problem by cutting off dick. Like, no.
Yeah.
What about women? There's plenty of women that have sexually molested other people. I mean, like, we can't look at it in these weird surface level, get what I want, and this is how we save the world.
Yeah.
No.
It really can't be about punishing people to make ourselves feel better. It has to be about what the evidence says will actually like improve the situation. So, and that's tough, but it's like, yeah, I don't know. It really comes down to like, do we care about solving the problem or do we not? And if we care, then there's a path that we can take to make progress, so man, I feel like we've kind of covered it. That really yeah, I'm gonna have to like process a little bit. That was powerful. um is there anything you wanted to tag on to the end of the conversation before we wrap up? Anything you want to
I was
plug? You
mentioning I'm
working on any
what's that?
projects?
I am working on a project, but I haven't really been talking about it too much with people because it's not far enough along for me to want to share too much. But I don't mind. I'm sure that the base who is going to listen to this is mostly people that I know anyway. I'm actually working on a book, which is pretty cool. I'm gonna try to get it self-published on Amazon first, and that's Amazon Bezos. But it's easy. It won't cost me basically anything.
Sure.
So once I do that, then I can start sending it off to a few places. I'm not sure if you're aware of AK Press. Yeah. So they're actually in Chico, California. I'm just down in Sacramento, and it's about an hour and a half away from me right now. They do awesome books, mostly definitely leftist, with usually a sort of libertarian socialist or anarchist bent.
Yeah.
and I kind of want to create a sort of, it'd be a multimedia sort of project. It wouldn't be just like a book on, oh, these are my thoughts, this is what I think. I do everything, poetry, visual arts and stuff. So I kind of want to create this book that is able to encapsulate that without it just being like, here's a picture of something, and here's a picture of something, and here I wrote this. So I'm trying to get a few people involved with that. Other than that, yeah, no, I've been just trying to take advantage of losing my job during this wonderful COVID time. And I've been doing these awesome talks. You might be interested in them. Of course, you'd have to wake up pretty early because I have to wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning on Sundays to listen to them. They're out of London. Conway Hall is doing them. They always have very interesting ones. The last one I listened to was how technology influences our ethics, which I thought was a very interesting topic. And then this next one is tomorrow. It's on reporting in Russia from Lenin to Putin, and how the West has seen Russia basically in the modes of reporting that we've seen throughout the West, and how it influences the way that we see Russia.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's been great. Hey, I'll piggyback on that wonderful violence thing. I actually just applied for a handgun. I'm picking that up on Tuesday, so just in time for the election.
Nice. There you go.
Gotta love it. Oh yeah, they're hard to come by these days. Apparently, everybody and their mother is buying a gun because everyone's scared.
And I'm sure it's extra difficult in California.
Yeah, actually, we have a lot of very specific laws. Obviously, sorry, this thing is
fighting the law.
Yeah. Well, one of them is that everything has to pass certain regulations under California law, making it so that new generations that come out guns, even if they're functionally the same model, even just like a little bit of a different grip, they have to be scrutinized and sent to the state, and it's a whole long, like year-long process of checking it out. So gun manufacturers don't even send their new models to California to have them scrutinized. So like, let's say, for instance, Glock. We all know Glock, right? Glock has Generation 5 G17s, which is a basic handgun used by a lot of police departments. In California, the highest model you can get is Generation 3 that came out in like 1992. So that's a little bit harder to find weapons here, yeah. But actually, I didn't mind it at all. It was a background check. You have to take a safety course, and then you have a 10-day wait where they can decide whether they give them to you or not based on their background check. And it has multiple things. Even if you weren't like, a felon, let's say if you were known to have major addiction issues or major depression issues, that's something that they could deny you for as well. So it's actually, it wasn't that big of a deal to me. I didn't mind it, but I know that a lot of people are like, it took our guns.
All right, man.
What about you? What are you working on anything?
I'm
other than these awesome talks.
Yeah, I'm putting some time and energy into this. I've been doing some, I was like really active in the Yang campaign. I'm a big fan of basic income, so doing some
Andrew,
work.
What? No.
Doing some work post campaign, trying to follow up with some of those ideas.
Like community first and or forward, or
yeah, there's actually both. And it's there's some confusing branding there, but yeah, I'm connected to like our local group, even though I don't have a whole lot of time for that, but I still do a little bit for them. And I got a number of things on my plate, but this is kind of the most public facing thing I'm doing right now. And so just trying to set aside a few hours every couple of weekends to talk to someone about something that I think is like really vital, that we get a hold of this before it hurts us any more than I think our ignorance on the subject already does hurt us, because I think it's the source of a great deal of suffering. So
yeah, I'm actually pretty involved with the local DSA chapter here,
Nice.
which is funny. I never really expected to. I've been part of the DSA for a couple of years now, but didn't really do anything until signed on with the local chapter here. And they have a Libertarian Socialist caucus as well here, which is cool. And we all get together. We've been doing a lot more Zoom meetings, obviously, than in person. But there are times that I think we have beers and roses is what it's called. And it's just like a Zoom
All right.
hangout where we all talk politics and stuff. And now I can bring up this wonderful subject to them. We can all
Yeah.
have a discussion about free will while drinking in front of our computers.
Right. We'll see how much free will exists after the conversation when everyone's inebriated. Well, anyways, man, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up. We ran a little
Yeah.
bit longer than I thought we would, but I had a good time, and I feel like we covered a lot of important stuff. I appreciate your time and your thoughts so much. And to anyone that is still watching, I appreciate your attention there. Um, Hopefully, we'll have another video up within the next maybe couple of weeks or so. So, anyways, appreciate everyone, and I hope you have a good day.
Hey, Chet, thank you very much. I appreciate you having me on. It's always wonderful talking to you. And yeah, hey, if there is anybody still hanging on after about an hour and 45 minutes, you know, maybe there is some free will there.
Awesome. Take care.
All right. Thank you very much.